Good morning. Thank you very much to both Russ and Colin. That sets me up very nicely to talk about networking this morning. And I think we probably have a great barometer in the room already on attitudes to networking. So when I say the word networking, it's clear everything ranging from apathy, why bother, to yes, I'm definitely thinking about this. And of course, the feelings of dread that many people have walking into a room full of people they don't know. So I'm hoping I can help address those fears this morning and help all of you really think more about networking in your career and the value it can bring. So that is what we're going to be focusing on. I would love by the end of this morning if those of you that are on the apathy end of the scale are at least thinking a little bit more about networking and how you might do it. And those of you that have got more of the fear of dread, you actually feel like you now have some skills that you can approach networking far more confidently. That's what the next hour is about. So to introduce myself, I know a couple of people in the room. I'm Joanna Gordon. I run a business called Inside Out Image. And everything I do is about helping professional people communicate themselves effectively, engage with others, to build great professional relationships. So what on earth does all of that mean? Actually, what I do is I help people with their image and impact. So everything related to what I call the tools of appearance, body language, and voice, and then how we develop the skills and the confidence in different scenarios in business, such as networking, to do them well and bring us greater professional success. I haven't always run my business. It's 5 years old this month. Beforehand, I worked for a big American company in marketing, the glamorous world of nappies and toilet roll. So it's got a little more glamorous with time. Then I did some consultancy work in the city for a few years before retraining and doing something different. So if you want a simple way to think about what I do, essentially I help professional people market themselves. So we might not want to think of ourselves as things to be marketed, but actually that is what we need to do to stand out and progress in our careers. So networking, very much when Russ asked the question, I think probably what came into all of your minds were events. So things like this, conferences, maybe internal events, events run by clients, and that is what I am going to focus on today. We're going to talk through the key stages of preparing to go to events, actually going to them, and importantly, what should happen afterwards. But I do want you to keep in mind that even those of you that said, don't really bother with networking, you do actually do some networking, because just around the office, conversations you have with people outside of those in your immediate team, when you meet them in meetings, perhaps in the corridor, that is starting to network. And what I would say is don't write that off. That is important. Build on that and use those opportunities. So we're not going to talk about all of those today. That's a whole other session. We are going to focus on events. But do think about networking in the sense that actually Russ talked about it on his diagram. He'd met those people at all sorts of different events, but also people he knew from in the office, maybe even some he went to university with. So don't write off those opportunities too. So what we're going to start off with is, I know Russ had a definition of networking, and I have one too, surprise, surprise. So what I consider networking to be is meeting people to create mutually beneficial relationships. So just think about that for the moment. It's not contradictory at all, actually, to what Russ said about just making friends, meeting people. But what I'd like to emphasize here is thinking about the mutually beneficial. We'll come back to this, but when you think about going to an event, we naturally go thinking about what we're going to get out of it, why we're bothering to go, why we're giving up our precious time. But actually, that's not the best approach. When we do go to events, it's about thinking how we can help other people. Do you remember what Russ showed on his great diagram of all the connections he'd made over his network, introducing people that didn't know other people? That's really what it's about. There's one particular networking event that I have visited, and they talk about givers gain. It sounds a bit cheesy, but it is absolutely true. If you go with the mindset of taking all the time, that won't help you build rapport with people and won't help you build relationships. So really have in mind the mutual element. We can move the slide on. So I've mentioned conversations in the office, formal meetings, online and events. So just to have those in your mind, but that event focus is ours for today. Networking. So I've given you a definition, and lots of people have in mind, as indeed Russ alluded to, that, oh, I'm not in sales, I don't need to go. Networking should not be about buying and selling. It should be about what else can I get out of it for my career as well. So if you're going with the attitude of, I'm in development, business development, I need to go and sell, that's not the right attitude to have. It's not to say they shouldn't have some goals, but that shouldn't be your primary goal in your mind in terms of mindset, because that will set the tone for how you interact with people. So Russ has helped you out a bit here, but why might you go to networking? Why might you bother with events? Anyone like to suggest? Perhaps some of our keener networkers. Why do you bother? Please just shout out loudly.
Make new friends.
Make new friends. Yep, that's nice. If you want more friends, that's great. And career friends too, really important. Thank you. Anything else?
To look after the next career move.
Yes, very, very important. I can say this because you're from all different companies. I'm not stood running a workshop for one particular company. But for your career, you might love the role you have right now, but you might not in 2-3 years' time. And there's a lot of a hidden job market now. Lots of people make moves that are not about recruiters and traditional methods. They are through networks. So very, very important. Getting to know your clients better is an obvious one. So it's December. What a wonderful opportunity to network, as long as you don't pick up too many glasses of wine. But a great way to get into networking quite softly, because there are more drinks, there are more opportunities, and it's a good way to meet those clients better if they do invite you to something. It's going to be a bit more informal, and when we meet people where they're at, we get more of a feel for their personality. It then does make the work easier, as I say, as long as you don't overdo the wine. Business development is the obvious one. And then thirdly, to become known in a sector, known for your expertise and what you've been working on. So from your own career perspective, but also being seen as an expert. So when people want some sort of service, they will think of you and the firm you represent. To build your knowledge. So coming to a conference like this, that's the predominant focus, I would say. The networking is the side benefit, but to come and learn about networking, learn from the negotiation session I'm doing later, learn from the other experts that are here to supplement your career. So soft skills learning, such as this, as well as more technical learning that you might go for. And people in corporate roles almost always diminish the importance of networking in their mind. When I worked in corporate, I didn't do any. I'll be honest about this. I wish I had. It would have made life a bit easier later on. But it's very easy to think, I'm in my role, I'm just doing my job, that's all I need to do. But really, really important to consider networking. This is a challenge for every big firm, I would say, to create real, genuine networkers such as Russ. And the time to start is now. Building on his point from earlier, he said he didn't do it up until a couple of years ago. You can't build a network the minute you need one. If you decide next month you want to move on, you just aren't going to have the network to do it that way. You're going to have to go the more traditional route for that new role. But if you've got a network, you've got the help there. Likewise, if you go into a business development role, as you become more senior, you're expected to sell work. That is an awful lot easier if you have a network. It is very different for me because I run a smallish business, but pretty much all my work comes from networking. And taking when Russ was saying about the, I think it was tech startup mindset, actually I suspect that's a lot at what they were getting at. How can we bring in new clients in a different way? I am stood on this stage because I met one of your committee at a networking drinks 2 Christmases ago, probably. That is how I got here, and how actually I've got to do some other work in the actuarial space. So, although it is different for me because I'm a small business, it has a long-lasting effect for you if you started early. So don't write it off. Then at networking, what we've got to think about is building up these great relationships. It is about building rapport with other people. If you think about, even on a day-to-day perspective, if you're choosing which lawyer to work with if you're buying a house, most of them you would expect have the technical skills to do the conveyancing for you. So price might be an aspect, but actually the ease of dealing with that solicitor. You will make a people choice. That's what we do. So in business, when clients have the option of who they're going to work with, they expect that all the big actuarial firms have the technical expertise, so how they can differentiate people. And there are 3 ways we start to build up these great relationships as a baseline. The first one is getting known. If you're not known, you can't start to build good relationships. So what that means, getting known within your firm, outside of your core team, getting known by senior people, others in other teams, you never know, you might want to move somewhere different, as well as externally. So being known, if you're not known, you can't start to build relationships. Second is being liked. Now, I don't want this to sound like being liked in a sort of wet, people-pleasing, yes person kind of way. It's not that, but it's about trying to connect with people. A lot of listening we heard about from Russ, being curious, showing interest, connecting with people, not just being focused on what we want to say about our work. And the final one is trust. Trust is two-sided. The easier one is personal trust, and that is people feel we have honesty and integrity. So I leave my bag over there on the table and I trust that no one's going to steal it. Simple. And usually if we like people, that personal trust follows. We don't like many people that we don't trust in that way. It doesn't follow. But professional trust can be harder to achieve. Professional trust is about convincing people we are truly an expert at what we say we are an expert at. So whether that's pensions, car insurance, pet insurance, whatever subdivisions of those you might have, it's people seeing that we are credible and that they believe us, that we're good at that. Some personalities will need to experience our work before they truly believe that, but other people will believe that from just how we interact with them and build up this likability. So if you think about all the people you know, you've met thousands of people, haven't you? If you think about from university, work experience, your office now, people who've lived in your street, we all know thousands of people. I've never had anybody tell me they like all of them. So that's where the next stage down is. So we don't like all those people that we're going to meet at this conference, these couple of days. I'm sure you'll meet some people you like very much, and others you think, not sure I'll try and talk to you again. It's natural, it's human. The next step in from that is the trust element from a professional perspective as well. So there are some people we might like, but we maybe don't trust all of them in a really professional way. That might take a bit more time. But what we're trying to achieve is those 3 things with the people we meet. Now, realistically, we're never going to achieve it with absolutely everybody we meet, but we've got to give ourselves the best chance, because all of them are important to build those relationships and get results from networking, and image, personal image, is the gateway to that. Just want to dwell on that point a little bit more. I'm going to come back to it, but when I say personal image, I mean about the perception people have of us. So what we are communicated to people. So I'm going to come back to the key elements of that a bit later on. We're just going to touch on them, but just hold that in your mind as a thought. So having talked about what networking is and why we should bother, we've now got to think about what we might do about actually going to something. So you really could, in the city, particularly in London, and I'm sure in the big cities elsewhere in the UK as well, and globally, you can network morning, noon and night. There are breakfast events, lunch events, day conferences, evening drinks, talks. The list is truly endless. So you do need to narrow it down. We don't have time for lots of networking. When I started my business, I would probably network 3 to 4 times a week. And that's now why it's built really on networking and word of mouth. But you've got to set something that's realistic for you. And think about carefully who you want to meet. Why are you actually going? What's your goal at this particular time? It might be quite broad and unknown at this stage, as Russ demonstrated with all the different people he'd built in that nice diagram. But you might have a very specific goal, whether it's looking for a new role or it's gaining more expertise in a sector, so you want to talk to people there. So think very carefully, who are they and where do they hang out? It's worth trying different events that you see that are available in your sector and also outside of it. There are different formats, so there are more formal ones, there are more relaxed ones, there are ones around a conference. A conference is in fact a good start because it's very easy. Why is a conference an easy starter to networking if you're not used to it? Why might you go to a conference rather than just a room full of people and some drinks? Sorry, you have to shout at me a bit. Great, something in common. Yes, you've all gone to hear somebody like me, and afterwards you can say she's rubbish, she was this, or don't believe her, whatever, but it gives you a point of conversation, doesn't it? You've got to focus, rather than you're just thrown into a room in an informal setting. So think about what sort of setting might be right for you. Also think about the time of day. If you're not a morning person, don't sign up for a breakfast networking. You're not going to be your best self, and you're not going to be awake and up for talking to people if it's early in the morning and that doesn't suit you. Okay, so really think about what's going to be most beneficial for you, and ask other people. Ask those around you that are more into networking what they go to, and maybe go with them. Definitely avoid hanging out with them when you're there, but get some ideas and perhaps at least go to the event with them. That might help you feel a bit more confident. Before you go, it's very important, even if you only spend 5 to 10 minutes, thinking about why you're going. So a bit deeper, what are my goals for going? If you plan and prepare, it will psychologically help you, rather than just rocking up in the room and going, oh, right, yeah, I've got to talk to some people. And it will help you create more opportunities according to your goals. Think about who you want to meet. Is it potential clients if you're starting to get some encouragement to develop business? Is it referrers of business to your firm? Is it other partners, people you could work with, some expertise you need from a different space? What does that really look like? Why are you going? List of attendees. Anyone ever had a list of attendees sent to them apart from this event? What might you have done with it? Anything? Oh, that's nice, filed it, binned it, deleted it. It's worth using it a bit. Have a look at it. Who's on it that you know already? Who's on it that you might want to meet? And going to Russ's point of not being creepy, you might want to do a bit of research without becoming a stalker. So how this can be helpful is, for example, if there's a particular person on that list that I feel like will be beneficial to my goals to meet, whilst I don't want to get to the event and be going around scanning badges, trying to look for the person, it can be good to know a bit more about them in case I do come across them. So what can be good is using LinkedIn for that and finding out a bit more about them, that then you can use that in conversation. And that doesn't mean if you do encounter them that you suddenly pipe up with, oh yeah, I see you went to so-and-so university. They might be a bit freaked out. But there will be general conversation and perhaps talking about career progression. And say they did go to the same university as you, what you might do is drop in at some point, well, I finished my degree at blah, blah, blah university, and they'll chip in with, oh, I went there too. And that immediately starts a conversation. So you've got to be quite clever about how you use that information, because it can go very wrong, but just putting in a bit of forethought can help you greatly. Set yourself some specific goals, because if you set some specific ones, you're likely to achieve something rather than absolutely nothing. Even if you don't achieve them fully, you're more likely to get somewhere along the path. So it might be 3 conversations you can follow up with, 3 people that you feel like you had a connection with, and maybe they don't fulfill your immediate goal, but as Ross explained, there might be a use for them later on. So don't rule people out immediately, and think about what your goals might be. Then think about, when you're going to walk into that room, the impression you're going to make on other people. First impressions are extremely quick. The Harvard research, I know you probably all love research in this room, some of it says 2 seconds, some of it says 5, some of it says a generous 7, but the message is it's all less than 10. So it's extremely quick. Now, if you make a negative first impression for whatever reason, it might be you rush in the room looking hot and sweaty, you look annoyed because the train was late and the dog was sick on your suit this morning. All of that stuff could happen. You could make a negative first impression if you start telling somebody all of that straight away. But it is reversible. But the bad news is it takes up to 7 positive things to happen to reverse a negative first impression. So in a scenario such as networking, you don't really have the time to be reversing that, as per a job interview, in fact. So think about that quite carefully. And you want to think about the 3 tools that I mentioned earlier that you have that make an impact on other people: appearance, body language, and voice. So those 3 things make up the majority, 93%, of the impact you have on somebody when you first meet them. If you just think for a minute, I gather you had some drinks or some activities last night, maybe you just talked to the people you knew already, but if you didn't, what made you choose the new people? It would have been something about what you saw, probably, something visual as a first point. The other thing you need to prepare is how will you introduce yourself? And it was great that Russ touched on this, really, about trying to engage with people and explain stuff. I worked with actuarial consultancy earlier this year, and when we were talking about this topic, this person's attitude was, well, if I'm talking to someone who doesn't understand, I don't want to be talking to them. We had a fun conversation. So really that is not the attitude to have, because whilst at this stage you might go to events mainly with actuaries and they will understand what your job role is and what you're talking about, they equally might not if it's very specialist. As you become more senior, you will need to network with other people that are more generalist. The CEOs we saw in those videos, they don't know all the ins and outs of all the actuarial roles that are in the industry. So you do need to think about how can you introduce yourself in a way that's both easy to understand and interesting, in a way that people can ask you more things about it. So how you introduce yourself will of course differ depending on whether you are going to an event that's mainly with other actuaries or it's a wider type of event. So do think about that before you go. That first impression, 55% is visual. So it's body language and appearance. So those are the 2 main things you need to be thinking about, particularly at networking, with regard to engaging with people and making a positive first impression. I'm not going to go through all these in great detail, but think about for your appearance aspect, appropriateness, what's the dress code for the event, getting that right. If you don't, you feel very out of place versus everybody else. It's like going to the party after work where everyone else has gone and taken their work clothes off and you turn up in your work clothes. You don't feel right all evening. So that's very important. Basic grooming. People look at me like I'm crazy when I talk about personal hygiene and grooming, but I see the most senior, experienced people that are extremely off-putting to engage with at networking. So do think about the totality of the impact you are having on people. Body language, worth touching on these. Posture is super, super important. Anyone got an idea why posture matters so much? I'll give you a clue. When can you see someone's posture? Always, yeah. Even if someone walks in the room now, at the back, I probably can't see their detailed facial expression, but I can see their posture. And we read so much from that. Think about a slumped posture versus straight. We can see if someone's relaxed, open, approachable, whether they're uptight or nervous. So really think carefully about your posture, not just the minute you're engaging with somebody at networking, but actually the minute you walk in the room. Expressions tell a lot about what we're thinking in our head and are worth considering in all aspects of business for sure, because we can give so much away that we might not want to. Think about the meeting that you're completely bored of and you've sat there for hours and you really want it to be over. There's a good chance your face is telling everybody that. So you do need to try and manage your expressions so that you're not giving the wrong impression. Thirdly, mannerisms. There are lots of people that have annoying mannerisms. You definitely don't want them at networking when you're trying to engage with people. They can be very distracting. They make sure people aren't really listening to you. They're watching your annoying mannerism. This is a very extreme example. I've never seen it since, but I used to work with somebody that when he was thinking, when you were talking to him, he would do this. A very bright guy, econometrician, so a little bit touching on your field, so very mathematical, very statistical, he'd do this. And you just sat there thinking the whole time, what's going to happen? Is he going to break his nose? Is his finger going to go up his nose? I wasn't listening to all the sage thoughts that he was sharing. So really, that's a very extreme example. There are other things, people sliding their rings on and off, people flicking their hair, whatever it might be. But fundamentally, you don't want to distract from the core thing you are trying to communicate. Gestures are very, very important to use when networking, when you're talking, trying to engage people. The research shows that we increase the listener recall, so how much people remember of what we say, by a great deal when we use gestures. So that holds for presenting too, but when you're talking about in networking as well. Think about the progression of a story. If you're giving a case study of something you've worked on recently, the problem started here, we worked on it this way, and the outcome was this. It just helps to take people on a journey. If you have no gestures at all, you look very nervous and anxious. And equally, too many gestures is just too overpowering for people. Eye contact, essential when we're talking to people at networking to build rapport and feel connected. And lastly, smile. I don't know if we've got anyone Russian in the room. I'm told in Russia, smiling is seen as a sign of weakness in business. So don't go to Russia and smile. But in our culture, I think smiling at people is a great thing to do. It breaks the ice and very normal as we greet people. And remember, body language is not just about thinking what we're communicating, but reading the other person that we're talking to or people. Reading whether they're bored, disengaged, enthused, excited, and then we can adapt accordingly. So very, very important skill, and we could spend half a day talking about all of those in more detail. So do think about it. If you don't come to one of my more detailed workshops, find a book on it, because it's really important to be well versed in it. Just going to touch very briefly on voice and language. So style of language at networking, keep it positive, keep jargon out. It doesn't look clever, it just looks silly. Often people don't understand it, so only use it if you're absolutely certain the person you're talking to will understand it. Otherwise, they just feel intimidated and disengaged from you. And speak clearly. Say things how they are. If you're talking through a case study, just pick out the relevant details and make sure it makes sense to somebody that doesn't have inside knowledge. In terms of voice, you want to make sure you have a varied tone. There's nothing more boring than someone that just talks on the same level all the time. It's really disengaging. Equally, two of the biggest problems I see with even very experienced professionals is that they talk too quietly and they talk way too fast. Remember, when you're at networking, you're engaging, people haven't heard your name before. People haven't heard what you've done before. It is new information to them. People will often ask you to repeat something once, but after that they won't bother because they feel embarrassed and like they should have picked it up. So really make sure for good engagement with that person, you think about using your voice very well. So we've done our preparation. Now the day comes, we actually have to go, because otherwise the whole thing's a waste of time. So now is the day when we're going to attend our event. Make sure you take plenty of business cards. I know there's a lot of debate about business cards. Are they old-fashioned? Should we get rid of them? I actually think they're still a really valuable tool, because if you don't have any, how are you going to swap details? Yes, you could get your phone out and you could type in their email address or their name, but really that creates disengagement. You could go on and connect with them immediately on LinkedIn, I suppose, but then it's just a bit meaningless. You've connected, the next day you'll probably forget all about them. So business cards are a very good way, because they make sure somebody's got your details correctly. They avoid the disengagement of getting a phone out. And it means fundamentally you end up with some that the next morning, when you put them on your desk, you think a bit more about each of them and the actions you need to take, because you do need to take action. So I do think they're still valuable. I know a lot of firms don't just give them to everyone, but do ask. It's worth having just one set printed. You don't need millions of them. You won't use them all. But I do think there's something worth having if you don't already. I think you've been provided with some at the conference today, so you can use those for connecting with other people afterwards. Very simple advice, but plan your journey carefully. You know, make sure, unlike me the other day, I thought Moorgate was a different street in London to the one it actually was, and I ended up at the wrong place. Fortunately, I had some extra time and it was fine, but if you're stressed about networking anyway, you don't want to be lost, late, or anything else. So really think about the journey carefully. And a very good tip is, even if it's a very informal event that doesn't have a hard start, like a conference, arrive at the beginning. Why might this be a good idea? Why would you arrive at the very start rather than half an hour in? Yes, people have already started mixing, yeah. If you're particularly anxious about it and you're not keen on having that, oh, where do I start feeling when you walk in the room of people already having conversations, then arrive at the beginning. It might feel a bit geeky and nerdy, but it's really worth it. A couple of benefits: you'll probably get to talk to the host if there is one, and maybe they will introduce you to somebody else that's already there, so they do the job for you. And also you can sort of mill around a little bit and talk to the other people that have arrived early, and it will just be much easier to form groups rather than having to join pre-existing ones. When you get there, another simple piece of advice: free up your hands as much as possible. Particularly us women, I'm usually, if I went in with all my stuff, I'd be doing the coat, handbag, drink and possibly food dance with trying to shake people's hands as well, which is really difficult and quite stressful if you're worrying about tripping over your laptop bag the whole time, or, oh, you've got to put your coat over here. So just try and put as much as you can in the cloakroom so you are free to stand with open body language and greet people well. Okay. I referred to earlier all the possible things that could happen to you, that happen to all of us on any day before we get to the networking event. Other people don't want a deluge of your negativity the minute they meet you. I was at an event last year and it was quite a formal event. There was half an hour of networking before lunch, before a formal sit-down lunch. One lady arrived late, and as she came in, you could just see she looked thoroughly grumpy. All her stuff looked like she'd actually brought all her worldly goods with her, so she hadn't left them in the cloakroom. And immediately you said, oh, nice to meet you. Oh, I've had an awful journey. I was late leaving the office, then it was raining, I had to get a taxi, then there was a massive queue on the Strand. And she just went on and on. I thought, oh my goodness, you're exhausting. I really don't want to speak to you. So really think about what you're dumping on people when you first meet them. It's not to say you can't start sharing any bad things that happen as you build conversation, but just really think about the impact that has, particularly on someone new. And take that moment to centre yourself. If you feel like you're feeling a bit stressed when you're getting to networking, just go outside and go to the bathroom, whatever it is, have 2 minutes and walk in that room feeling calmer and more ready to thinking about your goals that you want to achieve, rather than dashing in there feeling worried and stressed. Name badge on the right-hand side, completely contrary to what most of you have done probably in the room, because, of course, men's suit jacket pockets are here, so that's the natural place to put it. But actually, it doesn't work that well. If you think about how you greet somebody, they're more likely to look on this side of you. So very useful to have it there, because how many people really remember your name the first time they hear you say it? Not many, actually, because they're taking in who you are, they're thinking about what to say. So if you can just give them a helping hand so they don't have to ask you again, very, very useful. Also helps you to avoid those moments, if you can see other people's, when actually you've forgotten someone's name, someone you know approaches both of you and you're having that oh no moment, I've got to introduce them to this person and I've forgotten their name. So name badges are really, really useful just to stop any of us feeling embarrassed about that situation. But as for us, I'm not wearing mine, but I think you all know who I am. Have your business cards to hand. More of an issue for women than men. You know, you don't want to be fishing them out the bottom of your handbag with goodness knows what stuck to them, or, you know, stuck in your hairbrush or whatever else. Doesn't look professional, so just have them in the side of your handbag. Guys, have them in your pocket, jacket or trousers, so you can easily reach them if you need to. Not just for Dutch courage at an evening event, but get a drink as soon as you enter the room. Why might you do that? Any ideas?
So you don't have to break off conversations to get one?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the start.
So you don't have to break it off.
Oh yes, no, that's a good call. Yes, when you're desperate for that glass of wine, you don't have to say to the person, oh, I've just got to go and get that wine. Yes, that's a good one. Any other reason?
Makes pauses more comfortable.
Makes?
Like silences in the conversation more comfortable.
Yes, because you can take a drink. Yes, it also gives you something to do with a hand, doesn't it? If you're stood there with two hands, if you feel anxious, it just takes that away. The other reason to do it is whilst you're getting your coffee, your tea, your wine, if it's an evening event, you can be surveying the room and deciding who you're going to go and talk to. What you don't want to do at an event, say all of you were mingling in this room, is I go and stand in the middle of you and start looking around deciding who to join. Because then people feel like they're being rejected or accepted. You just want to be able to have a look and decide where you're going to head to. Okay, so just helps you ease into the room. The other benefit is you might actually meet somebody at the drinks table, and that easily starts a conversation rather than having to go and join a group individually. So getting a drink first. Remember, everybody has anxiety about these events. Absolutely everybody has some. I really like networking, but I still have the moment of, right, here we go. So just remember that. That can be very helpful to think, actually everyone feels a bit anxious about this. And actually seeing everybody engrossed in conversation makes that worse. So hence the recommendation to arrive at the start. It avoids that problem. Because we don't want to have too much anxiety about thinking, where can we join in this room? Where can we add value to a conversation? And do enter with confidence. You know, as I said with the posture, the minute people see you, it does help if you can try and look confident as you approach people. So, group types. So thinking about the groups that form in the room. Now, we don't really have time to do the lovely exercise I'd really like to do here because I think it will cause too much chaos because there are too many people. But if we have more time, I would get you all just to start chatting and we'd look at the groups that form. But actually, there are 6 group types that typically form. So we're just going to talk about those. And what you're looking for is open groups that you can easily fit into. And reading the body language in terms of how people are standing and their foot position is really key to knowing whether or not you should join a group. So what do you think you might see in a group of people where you should join? What would they be looking like? How would they be standing? Anybody got any ideas? Open angles, yes, really, really important. The minute 2 people are stood absolutely opposite each other with parallel feet, don't go and stand there. Not going to be good. Because what you end up doing is doing this, and clearly they are locking people out with that body language. It might be intentional, If somebody's come across the key person they saw on the list they wanted to meet, yes, they want to lock people out. Or it might be unintentional. It might have just developed because they're having a really good conversation. I wouldn't recommend you utilise this tactic very often at networking because you are there to meet lots of people. But actually there are a few instances like the ones I just talked about when you might use that. But definitely don't join people that are very closely either opposite each other if there are two, or if there are three, they're a very closed loop with no gap. So you are looking for people standing in an open position and leaving a Joanna-shaped gap, or whatever your name is, for you to join. Odd numbers. So these are great because actually there's usually some poor gooseberry there. There's someone that hasn't paired off. And they will be really, really grateful if you come and talk to them because they've probably been stood there for a while just nodding and going, yes, whilst the other two people talk to one another. So looking for that odd person, not odd, but you know what I mean, odd numbered, can be a very good way to find someone to talk to. They'll be very grateful. Be very careful if there's a large group, particularly if it's completely closed and they're all talking amongst themselves, they probably know each other very well. So avoid it like the plague, unless there's someone that firstly you know pretty well there, and secondly you are absolutely sure they'll be pleased to see you. Nothing worse than going up, tapping their shoulder, hi, and they're like, oh hi, oh no. Then what you're going to do, reverse out of that one. So really be careful with large and closed groups. I would say actually avoid them unless you're a very experienced networker or you know the people very well. Queuing is not cool to speak to people. You have permission to queue to speak to me afterwards if you want to ask me one-to-one questions. Did that last year and that was fine. But if there's just someone quite high profile on the list, it's not really appropriate to queue up and speak to them. Queuing is only really appropriate for a speaker at a conference or an event, or the host, perhaps when you're going to say goodbye. But really just hanging around and waiting for people is not great. If there's someone you really want to speak to and you know where they are, the best way is to try and get yourself integrated into their group at some time in the event. People on their own. So this person, what they typically look like, there's no pillar in the middle of the stage, but if you imagine I'm stood against a wall or a pillar, typically they're doing this with their mobile phone. Now, people that have serious work to do, they have to send an urgent email or a text or whatever, they very rarely stay in the event room to do that. They go outside because often they need to think about it, they don't want to make a mistake. So people doing that are usually just really anxious and not very confident about being at an event. So they can be challenging people to talk to sometimes because perhaps they're a bit shy, but again, they'll usually be quite grateful that you've come and rescued them. So if you feel confident enough to do it, then do approach them. Okay? The downside is then you are stuck in a pair, and pairs are more difficult for you then to move on and talk to somebody else. But I am going to give you some tips of how to do that. But just bear that in mind. If you're not an experienced networker, it's probably better to start with sort of an open three, because then there's more people to talk to and you can leave easier. But that person by the wall looking anxious can be a good person to try and join. So remember that when you're getting your drinks, you're surveying the room, planning where to join. Remember, everyone else feels nervous, and most people are welcoming and polite. I think I've had one really odd experience in my whole 5 years of a lot of networking. And yes, that stays in my mind because somebody who I knew left me with this extremely strange man who immediately she'd gone, bent down on one knee and kissed my hand. So that was a bit off-putting, I have to say, and I've remembered that about her, that she left me with him. So I'm not sure I'll be using her services. She works in PR. But you very rarely come across very strange people that do things like that. Most people, even if they're a bit quiet, they're not rude, they're fairly polite, and ultimately if someone is rude, just move on. I wouldn't even worry about making too many polite reasons, excuses. If they are really genuinely rude to you, I'd just leave. Remember that everybody is there to make connections. That's what you've come there for, so don't feel bad about moving on. We'll talk about moving on more in a minute, but you are there to meet several people. You're not there just to talk to your friend. Reconnecting with people is important, but actually it's about trying to get around the room and meet a variety of people without leaving with the most enormous pile of business cards. It's not a competition who can meet the most people. It's about quality as well, but it's not about talking to one person all evening. So when you approach a group and you're fitting into your gap, you've got to think about how you're going to start a conversation. Now, clearly, if it's with one person, so our person on their phone next to the wall, it's very easy. May I join you? I'm Joanna, whatever you might say. But actually, if you've got a group, you've got a bit more to manage, because it's very rare that you will approach a group and there will just be silence. There's something very strange going on if there's just silence. So inevitably you're interrupting something, aren't you? And what I find the most awkward is if I come into that gap, and clearly they're open to visitors because there's a gap, they immediately stop talking and turn to me. I don't want that to happen because it disrupts the flow. So usually I just wait till there's a pause in the conversation, then I just say, do you mind if I join you? And I usually add, just carry on and I'll join in, because if you disrupt their flow, it all becomes very awkward. So try and just really think about that. Then your opportunity will come when you need to introduce yourself, and I've just done a short little thing here to help remind you of the key things as you introduce yourself. So the first one is smile, of course, as you introduce yourself. The second one is handshake, which is really important to get right. I'm sure lots of you know people with bad handshakes. Anyone had their hand crushed when they've shaken someone's hand? Or equally, someone taken just the end of their fingers or given them a really limp handshake? You'd be surprised. There are really experienced people that still have a bad handshake. So do practice yours somewhere, not today, but somewhere outside of this forum, and make sure it's good, because you know what it's like. If you have a negative handshake, you're thinking about that for a few minutes and you're not listening to the person. So there's something very deeply psychological about how we connect with a handshake, and we do want it just to be, that was a good handshake, not think any more about it. Third one's a bit of a cheat, eye contact. So make sure you are looking somebody in the eye as you give them a handshake. You don't want to be sort of shuffling and looking at your feet. And then your name. So make sure you say your name very clearly. As I said earlier with voice, I met someone very senior yesterday at one of my clients. I didn't know he was going to be there to watch me present, so it was a bit of a surprise, and I didn't catch his name at all because he completely garbled it. Yes?
Do you have to say your first name?
Good question. I will answer that in just a second. Thank you. And he actually was a very clear speaker, but he just happened to garble his name. And remember, our name to us, we know what it is, but other people, even if it's John Smith, if you garble that, people won't even get it's John Smith. So particularly if you've got a complicated name, like my surname, you need to say it quite clearly. So your question about whether to say your surname, I think it depends on the context. So if, for example, you're going somewhere where everybody knows who you are, as in not that they've met you before, but they know there's going to be a Joanna at the meeting, and it's a less formal environment, I think you'll find just to give your first name. I think something like a conference, when you introduce people, it depends in the context again. If it's the evening drinks event, you might just say your first name. If it's during the day, you might say your surname. So it's just a judgment on formality, actually. And if you've got a very common first name, it's useful to give a surname. Just helps you to be a bit more memorable. The other thing that is useful to do with name, and it sounds odd, so I'm going to say this and advise you to practice it at home first in the bathroom mirror before you do it for real, because if you just do it for real straight off, you'll have a sort of quizzical look on your face, is to repeat your first name with a pause in the middle. So it's a bit James Bond style, but with your first name. So, hello, I'm Joanna Gordon. So you see, it doesn't actually sound that weird, does it? But it feels extremely weird. So do practice it. But the reason that's good is for what I said earlier, when someone's first meeting you, they're visually taking you in, so they might not take your first name in straight away. Does that answer your question about? Great. The last bit relates to being enthusiastic. So when I talked about earlier leaving personal negativity outside, this is the antithesis of that, so being enthusiastic. Now, we don't want to be like Tigger at networking, bouncing around with great excitement, but we do want to be positive and quite cheery, be interesting for people to talk to. Now, for those of you that are scared about what on earth do I say to someone I don't know, the good news is there are only 4 stages to any conversation. 4. That's all you've got to get through, and then you can move on. The first is starting the conversation. So that's really when you're doing the small talk bit. So getting to talk to people about normal human things. You might be talking to the most senior person from your company at an internal networking event, but they are human too. So don't feel that you have to immediately start talking about what projects you're working on. Think about points of commonality. Talk about the event you're at. If you're at an external event, how do you know the host? Have you been to this event before? Whatever it might be, find something to talk about. You are all at a very similar stage, I imagine, in this room, so there are lots of common questions you could ask one another. So think about that first before you get too much into your in-depth work questions. Talk about them. Get them to try and talk first, if you can, about their work. So Russ said earlier about listening to people. You can actually make what you say more relevant if you've heard them speak first. Because then if you're at a mixed event, you have no idea if they're a fellow actuary or not. They might be. But if that then will change what you say to them, how you talk about your work. I'm sure you talk to a fellow actuary very differently to somebody like me, because if you talk in actuarial terms, I probably won't understand a good percentage of it. So it does help you to judge what to say. And then lastly, leaving the conversation. So finishing it off well, because remember, networking is just the start of building relationships. Relationships take time. So always get them to speak first. Have some questions in mind, not just questions that are yes or no. Have a variety where people can answer with some depth. And also listen out for hooks. This is something you can do at networking events, but also around the office, other times you engage with people. Others always give you more information that you can ask about. So if someone says to you, oh yes, so this is actually my second firm I'm working at now, I worked somewhere else when I started my exams. Well, there's loads of questions you could ask then. Oh, which firm was that? What was your role there? Why did you leave? That can start a whole other bit of conversation. But you really have to listen to pick up on those hooks. Avoid talking about what you do first, either of you. The reason for that is, if you do that first, it's very hard to go back to the weather and talking about the venue. It's weird. So just some natural human conversation first before you get into too much work stuff. Avoid personal topics unless people bring it up. I could count on the number of times I get asked, do I have children? Like, there's an early question all the time. And I don't particularly mind being asked that question, but it's a bit personal. So wait till people sort of give you permission. People start talking about their personal life a bit more, fine, you can ask more about it. But just try and be a bit sensitive to people and wait for that. The more natural and free-flowing you can make that early stage of the conversation, the higher the chances are of building a better relationship ongoing. So if that's all stilted and difficult, then the work bit's going to be stilted too. So try and get into just an easy, like you're talking to a friend, as Russ talked about earlier, making friends. You talked about going to make friends. Try and think about it in that way rather than putting massive pressure on yourself. And then this is the point, of course, when you can bring in something you've read about them beforehand, if you feel confident about that. So the same university piece, bringing in something that will start that conversation if they were on your hit list. Listening. So Russ talked about this, and I just want to talk about this a little bit more because it is important to build rapport. If we all need to feel valued, we all want to feel listened to, and if we don't, we're probably not going to bother with the other person very much. It's also essential to find out more about what they do, where they're at, and how that helps you position what you're going to say about your work. And also your chance, whilst you're listening, to think about those opportunities. You know, how can they help you meet your goals at networking, but equally, what can you do for them? And you always learn new things. You know, there's someone in this room I've spoken to quite a lot, and I learned something new when I saw the detail earlier on the screen. So we don't know lots about people straight away, so it takes time to get to know them. And fundamentally, especially if you've gone for a business development reason, you need to understand what the challenges are for them in their role in their firm. You can then talk much better to that, and say they've talked about a particular challenge they're having, you can be thinking in your head, well, I can't help them with that, but someone else in my firm can. So later that gives you the opportunity to come back and offer to connect them to that person. So really, really listening deeply is vital. Use body language to demonstrate listening. So what might you do to show somebody you're listening? Sorry, someone said something, I didn't hear it. Nodding. Nodding's very good, but make sure it's not nodding dog. Anyone had someone like that talks listening like this? Really off-putting, because all it says is they're hurrying you up so they can speak. Really, really off-putting, so make sure it's gentle nodding. Anything else? You might, of course, a bit of that, sort of, yes, agreeing with them, with the nodding. Also, if you're standing up, if you're sitting down listening, this is quite a common position that when we're deeply listening, we do that. That looks weird, stood up, but just a gentle head on the side shows a bit more engagement. What you definitely don't want to be doing is looking over their shoulder for who the next person is you can talk to. You really, really don't want to do that, because people pick up on that very easily and it destroys rapport. If you spot an opportunity, so like I gave the example of connecting them to someone else in your firm because you can help them with that, try not to dive in with that minute. It looks a bit opportunistic. Try and come back with it later on. Maybe when you're thinking about leaving and say, oh, actually, I've had a thought. There's someone who might be able to help you with X. It makes you look less sort of grabbing and trying to just shove things at them. And the opportunities, remember, it's not just about what you're selling them. Think about, come back to what we had earlier, that it's not about buying and selling. It is about connections. How can I help you to get more information on this? You're looking for a new role. How can I help you with that? And if they ask you, sometimes people ask you, oh, you know, is there anything I can help you with? If you've offered them something, be really specific. Really, really specific. I've had people, when I've asked people that question before, I've had people say to me, oh, if you just go and look at my LinkedIn profile and, you know, if you think there's anyone you know that, you know, I could work with, that'd be good. I mean, can you imagine? Am I going to bother doing that? Whereas if somebody says to me, oh, I'm really looking to connect with a lawyer in this space because, like Russ gave lots of examples, which I can't remember now, of things he had to go off. Should we go into oil and gas or something? He didn't know. He needed to go and find people. Maybe he didn't know those people. Other people might have to connect him. You need to be specific to people about who you're looking for. Who can you connect people with in your network? So like Russ had lots of nice connections going across. I think it's really satisfying when you really help someone out by connecting them to someone you know. And that's how you start to build better memorability for yourself, more of a reputation as being a helper, and people think of you first when they have a business need in your area. Before you leave people, you want to get permission to follow up, because fundamentally, if you don't follow up after an event, you might as well have gone home and watched EastEnders or stayed in the office. You need to have something to do as a result. Leaving with a pile of business cards is going to do absolutely nothing. So make sure with the person you're very clear about what it is. Maybe it's about a really clear opportunity. You can connect them to someone in your firm. So that's something really great, and the next day, as you leave them, you'll say, oh, so I'll connect you to Bob or whoever it might be. It might be just you want to meet up for a coffee with them. Maybe you quite like them. You've done the know and like bit and you're building trust, and you can't see an immediate opportunity according to your goals, but you think, well, they're worth staying in touch with. You know, a professional person, what might we be able to help each other with? It's not always an immediate thing. And remember also, when you're networking, it's not just the people in the room, it's all the people all of us know too. So all of us know hundreds of people, don't we? So even if someone in the room can't help you, they can think of someone else. The very least you should be doing is connecting on LinkedIn with each person you meet, unless you really can't stand them and you never want to see their face pop up again on your LinkedIn feed. You should definitely connect with each person on LinkedIn if you've got their details and are able to do so. So make sure before you finish that conversation, you reiterate, oh, I'll do this, I'll connect with you on LinkedIn, oh, whatever it might be. Firstly, it helps cement it in your mind to remind you to do it. B, it helps them to expect you to do it. And C, it means you're more likely to do it because you've made that commitment. Okay. Moving on, this is the question I get asked a great deal. How do I move on from somebody when I'm bored and I've had enough? And we do all need to move on because, as I said earlier, we don't want to get stuck with the same person for too long. There's a quality-quantity equation going on, but also people do, naturally, they're not a person we particularly like or we just want to escape. So it's completely normal, but it needs to be done well. So if you're with one other person, how are you going to move on? What might you do? Introduce, as a champion networker here, introduce them to someone else, yes. Do be careful though, because if this person's quite boring actually, and you're really trying to get rid of them, and you introduce them to your boss or your client, they might not be very happy because they're then stuck with them. So be very, very careful about that. Be really sure you think you can see they'd connect well, and that, you know, that's worth doing. So, but a very, very good idea. No, not if they're boring and not a good person to leave with someone else. So really think about who would be good for them to meet. Anything else people have done? It's a very common one. Another drink, toilet trip. Why might that not be a great plan? Yes. And it's very obvious, isn't it? I mean, okay, we all do have those needs, but actually, fundamentally, they are going to feel dumped. And especially if they're a particularly shy person about networking, that's going to destroy all the good relationship building you just did. And even if you don't think they're that useful to you, and there's not going to be a longer-term professional relationship here, it's not great, because you're trying to create a feeling that people do like you and you're an affable person and a good connector. So not ideal. So what you might do is what Russ suggested. That's one option. Another thing you could do is go and join another group together. So be really blunt and say, it's lovely talking to you, even if it's not, but we should meet other people, shouldn't we? Should we go and join that group there? I can see there's a gap. And take them with you. Hopefully you'll both end up speaking to different people on different sides of the group. You could take them to get a drink. You obviously don't want to take them to the toilet with you. That would be weird. But to get another drink, I'd like another drink, would you? Oh, should we go and get one? Because then you both might bump into someone else at the bar. So you're taking them with you, not leaving them on their own. I know it might sound a bit pathetic, but people do psychologically feel dumped if you do that. So really try and think about, how can I leave this relationship as good as possible? If you're in a group, very easy, you can give those excuses a bit more. You can say, oh, lovely talking to you, I should move on. Oh, I need to get a drink. Oh, I need to go to the bathroom, whatever. That's absolutely fine because you're leaving a group. And no one's going to feel personally wounded by that. So the event has come to an end, and now after the event, we need to do something. As I said, if you do nothing, there was no point in you going. Because yes, you might have seen some people you already know, so they've seen your face again. That's great, that does have some value. But really, you want to try and make sure there's some other new outcomes. So think about first, did you meet your goals? If it was to have 3 people to have a follow-up coffee with or a lunch, or 2 people to have a further more formal meeting with, did you meet them? It doesn't matter if you didn't quite meet them all, but you're more likely to have met them to some degree than if you hadn't set any. Segment your contacts according to everyone needs to be linked to on LinkedIn, but then of course there's the ones that perhaps require an email, or perhaps you've said you'll put them on the e-shot that your firm sends out because what you do is of particular interest to them. Whatever it is, I usually make a little pile. There's all the people to connect to LinkedIn, and then there's the ones I need to do a bit more for. Okay. When you connect on LinkedIn, always send a personal message. I never get personal messages, or next to never, and it's really not good. It's so lazy. All we do is press connect. Sometimes you can't help it because people's settings don't let you write a personal message, but what I do then is I send them just connect, but when they connect with me, I then send them a message saying, sorry I didn't send you a message before, it wouldn't let me. I actually had a comment from someone last week, oh, you sent me a personal message, I've never had that before. But it's so lazy, and it takes 2 minutes if you do it properly. Just nice meeting you at the event last night. You might refer to something you talked about if it's not too cheesy. I'd like to connect with you on LinkedIn. So half of it, you can leave the main message, just add something to the front. Looks much, much better. Looks like you've bothered. Takes seconds. Also worth checking who they are connected to, because maybe you've got some connections in common that are unexpected. So then you can refer to that. And that's really good because it helps people think, oh, they know that person. Oh, that's good. Helps cement, really, that feeling of rapport building. Make sure you add them to the company e-shot list if you've said that you will. And just make sure you follow up with whatever you said you'd do. If you scheduled a call whilst you were in the event, so say you said, oh, I'll give you a call next Tuesday and we can talk more about whatever it was, just drop them an email to confirm that because they might have forgotten. And you don't want, when you call on Tuesday, them to go, forgot, sorry. You want to make sure you're building on what you've started. Personalise any email follow-up, a bit like with LinkedIn. Try and make sure you refer to something you talked about. And fundamentally, do what you promised. It is the worst possible thing when people at the time say, oh yeah, I can connect you to this person, they'll really help, and then they do nothing. It completely undoes what you've built up with the person the previous day. So the point that goes with that is make sure you think carefully about what you promised to. I've done this myself in my early years of networking. You think, oh yeah, I can connect you to this person. Then afterwards you think, well, I'm not sure I fully know them enough yet or have built up the trust, and this contact's very valuable to me. So it's a bit like the dumping someone on someone else at an event. You don't want to put someone in an awkward position. So really think carefully and almost be a bit more, well, I'll talk to so-and-so and see if they think it's worth you being connected. I find it very frustrating when people just do connections without actually asking me first, because it might not be relevant and it could cause an awkward situation. So really think about what you promised to do. Then with the following up, it can be very hard because we start to think, especially if someone was interested in our firm and talking to us more or someone else more, we think, I don't really want to do it, it's a bit pushy and I'm not comfortable. But really, if you said you're going to do it, not doing it is not an option. So you need to keep to doing it. Even though we'll have going through our heads, they'll say no, they won't be interested anymore, they won't remember me from the event, they were just saying that I could call them, they didn't mean it. That's all the sort of psychology we have going on, little person on our shoulder. But actually, you have to think about what's the worst that can happen. As Russ alluded to, it's not a love affair and you're going to have a massive rejection. It's not personal, it's just maybe they've had a rethink in the meantime. So the worst they can say is, actually, I've had a think and I don't think it's worth us talking anymore about that. So reframe your thinking and think of the opportunity. Something may come of it. We had a good chat at the event, we got on well, I should carry this on. And fundamentally, I said I'd call, I said that I'd send them this email, I said we'd meet for that coffee. So keep to what you promised. When you do follow up, remind people. People forget, they met a lot of people at the event, remind them, like the personalised email and LinkedIn, who you are. For some people, it might be you don't do something immediate. Maybe it's in 2 months' time, you said you'd have a follow-up conversation then. Put it in your diary, make sure it happens. Remember small things about people. If one of your clients mentions they're getting married in 6 months, put that in your diary. And 2 weeks before, just drop them a line, I think you said you were getting married next month, hope it goes well. It doesn't have to be creepy. You can do it in a really good way. If they've opened up and told you things, use that to build the relationship further. And fundamentally, networking is about starting these great relationships that do then need more nurturing as you go along. It's not to say that every single person you meet at networking you're going to build a great professional relationship with, but a few of them at least, so you want to give them the best start. So I'll get the clicker to work. I'm going to leave you with this little image of plants. So think of nurturing those. They're just little seedlings, perhaps even smaller than that when we begin, but throughout our career we should be aiming to grow those. So I know we are very behind on the timeline. We've worked through all these areas. I think what I'm going to do is I won't take group questions, if that's okay, because we are seriously behind, I think, by about half an hour. But I will stand down here if you want to come and ask me anything. And also, I would like to send you, if you'd like it, 10 top reminders about networking from today. So if you would like to receive those, I have some sheets here, which I will have on the table there. If you can write just your name and email address, phone number doesn't matter. Please write really carefully, because the number of times I get back to my office and no one can decipher what on earth's been written. So please just pop your details on there and I will make sure you get that in the next few days. You're very welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn or other social media. I put a lot of articles on LinkedIn about networking and other topics. So that's a good way to maybe get a bit more exposure and some more input. But certainly if you want those tips, please complete these, and I've got business cards there as well. Do contact me with questions, even if it's in 6 months' time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.